You're listening to the weekly Parsha Podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, 5782. This week's Parsha is Parshas Vayakhel, and the Torah gives us a continued description of all of the parts of the Mishkan. Again, a repetition of the obligation of the Jewish people to bring, to be misnadev, to donate towards the Mishkan. And we mentioned Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur, Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Chur, who was the main craftsman who put together the parts of the Mishkan. And the pasuk says, "Re'u kara Hashem b'shem Betzalel." See that Hashem has called in the name of Betzalel. So today we're going to speak a bit about names. We're going to read from the Medrash some beautiful concepts that are connected to names. Hadav Dichsiv says the Medrash like this: Toiv shem mishemen toiv. A name is better than good oil. We need to notice that the word shem and the word shemen, which means oil, they are similar. Shem and shemen. The word shemen contains the word shem, which means name. So we're going to see what is the connection, or what is the depth of these two ideas. What is the concept of a name? What is the concept of oil? So this verse is a verse in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 1. Kama hoylech shemen toiv mikiton letraklin. Let's say you have a small room, you have a larger hall. So how far, if you pour the oil on the floor, how far does it travel? How far does it go? It doesn't go that far. B'shem tov holech misev ha'olam bat soifai. But a person who has a good name, a person who has a good reputation, so that name can extend way beyond the hallway, way beyond your house, way beyond your own city, way beyond to the entire world. Shneimar vayetzei shem David b'chol ha'aratzos. As the pasuk says, the name of David went out in all of the lands. Okay, so we see that the concept of a good name has to do with David HaMelech, has to do with King David. King David became famous in all of the lands. Right? Obviously, what was he famous for? He was famous, let us say, not for his great military accomplishments, but rather for his spiritual greatness. So, the name of a person, as we'll soon see, the name represents the essence of who he is and what he's accomplished. Because shemen, as we'll see, shemen is oil. It does represent certain positive things. As we'll see later on, it represents the concept of Mashiach, let's say. The Messiah is anointed. That's what the Mashiach means. He's anointed with oil. The sons of Aharon were anointed with oil. Oil was used to show that this is an important thing. This is a chashuv thing. Because oil, if you put it in any kind of other liquid, it rises to the top. So the oil represents the fact that this is someone who is on a higher level, who is anointed. But the concept of Shem, of the name of a person, is a deeper aspect of a person's anointment, so to speak. We find, for example, in the deeper sources, they speak about shemo, a person's name. The word shemo is the same gematria as 346 as the word mekor. Mekor means the root. The root of the person, the highest aspect, is connected to the concept of keser, the crown. So a crown is something that rises above, which is upon the king's head. And the name of a person is connected to his root. This concept of the mekor has to do with where the soul sits. The soul sits above the head or within the head and above the head. So that's the root of the human being. When a person lives in consonance with his soul, like King David did, he was a melech, he was a king. The king wears a crown. So because he was someone who lived in consonance with his spiritual side, therefore he was someone who rose above, just like shemen, just like oil rises above. He was a king who rose above all of the others, all the other people. He was the one who could raise others up to that exalted level of who they could be. It says in Medrash, shemen toiv noifel al hameis hu mavish. We find in regards to the physical properties of oil, even the best oil, if it comes upon a person who has died, so what happens? What's the result? The result is that it causes decay. It causes further decay and a bad smell. Zevuvei maves yavish yabia shemen rekeach. Also, verse in Koheles, chapter 10, verse 1, speaks about the flies that come when there's a dead carcass. There's a yavish. It causes decay and destruction and a bad smell. Even the finest oil can do that. Okay, so oil, even though it has good properties, of course, there are many good things that it can be used for, but it doesn't help out somebody who's dead. It only causes worse things. Okay, shame type, however, when it comes to a good name, someone who has a good name, someone who is living, as we said, in consonance with spirituality. For example, Elisha Hanavi, it does not cause the dead to decay further. The other way around. Vayal vayishkav al hayeled. It says that when Elisha Hanavi came, the verse describes the great miracle that he performed. He brought a dead child to life. How did he do that? He lied down on the child, and by lying down on the child, he warmed up the child, brought him back to life. He was able to, in a miraculous way, bring the child back to life. So the power of someone who is innately spiritual, who has connected to his innate spirituality, is much greater than the oil which represents that which is brought up, someone who has been raised up. Okay? Then the verse says, V'yem hamavis miyam hivoldo. The end of the first pasuk we quoted in Koheles says, the day of death is greater than the day of birth. The day that a person dies is much greater than the day that he's born. What is the idea? We also find that it's better to go to a funeral, to go to a place of eulogies, than to go to a chasana, a wedding, other happy occasions. Why? Let us see. When a person is born, when a child is born, we don't know what his life is going to look like. We don't know what the future portends for this child. Okay? But when a person passes away, his actions make all of the people aware. We know what happened with this person. The actions speak for themselves. Right? The person has accomplished certain things in his life. We can look back on this person's life and we can celebrate the person's life. That's what it means in the pasuk when it says that the day of death is greater. That the day of death is greater than the day of a person's birth. Because even though, of course, we rejoice because of the immense potential or because of the fact that a new child has come into our lives, but we don't know where that's going to lead. We don't know what the future portends. But when a person passes away, there's a greater sense of what happened. We can look back and see what the person has accomplished. Once again, we see this idea, this concept of the shem, the oil that's poured on this person because now he's being mashuach, now he's going to be someone who's higher than others. He's going to be a leader. He's going to be a Kohen. He's going to be a king. So that just represents his potential. It's like the child who's born. We don't know what this king is going to do with his power. We don't know what this Kohen is going to do with his leadership. Will he succeed? That's something that we can only see after a person has succeeded and brought a good name to himself, has accomplished something, has connected, as we said, to his spirituality. Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says, Mashal shtei sfinos. Says a great mashal, awesome mashal. 2 ships, shayu parshas layam agadol, that went out to the great sea. Achas yotzes min halamin ve'achas nechneses lalamin. One we see going out of the port, and one we see coming into the port. Zoshe yotzes hayu akol smeichin ba. Everyone comes out to celebrate. Their friends are on that ship. They're going to have all kinds of adventures on the ship, on their travels, whatever it is. All the people come out to see them off. Okay, so everyone's excited. But the ship that's arriving, not everyone came out to greet the ship as it arrived. They weren't as excited. Pikech echad hayasham. There was one wise person who was there. Amar chilufei advar mani re'akan. This wise man said, I see the opposite of the way things should be. Why? The one that's going out of the port, everyone shouldn't be so excited and happy. Nobody knows when it's going to reach its destination. Nobody knows how many seas, how many churning seas it's going to encounter, and how many difficult wild winds there are going to be in storms, etc. But the ship that's come in from the sea, that's come into the port, everyone should be excited. Because you're seeing the ship come in and you know that it made it safely to either leg of its journey. It's arrived safely. So too, when a person is born, everyone's all excited and happy. But we don't know where it's going to end. We don't know where it's going to lead. When a person has passed on from this world, so we can look at his life and we can see what the person accomplished. It's like the ship that came into the port. So it's about this that King Solomon said, that it's greater the day of death. The end of a person's life has a much greater quality to it if the life was lived well than the beginning of a person's life. Okay, so that's the first concept of the Medrash. And now let's look a little bit further in the Medrash. We'll get the wrap-up of the concept. There's a few more lines. Toiv shem mishem and toiv. Toiv ha-yashmoisen shel Chanan mishal v'azarya mishem and hamishcha shenimshechu Nadav and Avihu. Says the Medrash that we find that Hanani, Mishael, Vazar, they were three Nevi'im, three prophets. They were thrown into the lion's den. They were thrown, into the fire. They were thrown into the fire. I'm thinking of Daniel. Hanani, Mishael, Vazar were thrown into the fire, just like Aharon, Avinu, like Abraham. What saved them from the fire? It was their good name. It was the fact that they were great prophets. They were on an exalted spiritual level. Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aharon, who were they? They were two people who were anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, with this oil. They indeed had great potential for greatness. They were to rise above their brethren, to be the leaders, to be those who would stand to represent the Jewish people in front of Hashem. And what did they do? They went in lifnai v'lifnim. They went into the Holy of Holies with a foreign fire, and they were burned, they died. Lama she'elu nichnasu lahakriv v'yatzu srufin. Nadav and Avihu went inside, they brought their korban, they brought their ketoras, and they came out and they were burned. Ve'elu nichnasu lekivshon ha'esh. These ones came into the fire, v'yatzu b'shalom. They were able to get out with peace. Havish toiv shem mishem and toiv. Such an important idea, such an essential idea. It's not enough to be a leader. It's not enough to have a position of power. It's not enough to have superficial, external greatness. External greatness is only significant insofar as the person internally is great. Hanani, Mishael, Vazar, these great Nevi'im, these great prophets, they worked on themselves to an incredible degree. They studied the Torah to an incredible degree in order to be able to reach the possibility of having nevuah, to have prophecy. They were people who, because of the spiritual essence which they tapped into, which they were representative of, which they manifested Hashem in the world because of that, so they could experience a miracle. But Nadav and Avihu did not. They had been anointed. They had it on the outside, but they didn't have it. It didn't go in on the inside. Davar acher, toiv shem mishem and toiv. Says the Medrash another aspect of this. Toiv shem mishem and toiv. Toiv haya shmo shel Betzalel. Mishem and toiv. The name of Betzalel, bring this back to Betzalel. Betzalel, we're speaking about Ru'u kar Hashem b'shem Betzalel. See that Hashem called in the name of Betzalel. What is the idea? Toiv haya shmo shel Betzalel. The name of Betzalel was great. It was greater than good oil. The The pasuk gives us, look, this is his name. This is his name. This is who he is. Look, the Torah says, look at the name of Betzalel. And we find, it's explained in the Meforshim, that if we look at the difference between Betzalel and other people, we see Betzalel, we see his name, his father's name, his grandfather's name. We see that he brought great credit, great goodness, because of the essence of who he was. Because he was able to tap in to his essence, to his spiritual essence, and use his talents in order to bring glory and honor to Hashem by creating the Mishkan. Because of that, he brought great honor to his family. We find other people who it's mentioned the negative things that they did. Korach, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahas, goes back, it tells us their lineage, because he brought great shame. He brought great embarrassment to his family. Betzalel was somebody who, through his spiritual connection, because of his connection to his spirituality, he brought a great honor to his family. And he brought a great honor to himself. He was somebody who connected. Re'u. Re'u means see it. When you see something, seeing is believing. He connected all the way, completely, to his name, to his essence, to his mekor, to his shemo, to who he really was. And because of that, so he brought great honor to himself and to his family. And the message here that this medrash is teaching us, that we need to take out of the medrash, is the fact that we need to connect to our essence. We need to connect to our spirituality. We need to connect to who we really are. And not do things superficially. Not do things on the outside. It's so easy to walk through life, to go through the motions, to go through our day. We get up, we daven, we learn, we are involved in our work, we're involved with our families. All the things that we do, all the things that we're involved with, it's very easy to get caught up in all of the superficial things that are going on. We see with our eyes right now today, look around. Look what's going on in the world. What happens when people are superficial people, when they're not real, they're not ready to stand up for true principles, but they have all kinds of crazy ideas of what's important. And those things are not truly important. We see what the leaders of the world do in situations that represent the truth of who they are. We see them fall. We see the superficiality that they are and that they represent. They were just anointed with oil, but they never became something real. They never became something real. Those who stand up for what's right, those who stand up for truth and for goodness and for spirituality, those who are willing to stand up for what's right, those are the ones who ultimately are going to have the spiritual wherewithal to weather the tests of time, all the difficulties and the challenges. Otherwise, without that truth at the essence, without connecting to the shemo, to the mekor, to the person's name, the person's root, his spiritual essence, which is, by the way, also the word ratzon, which means desire, which means the ratzon Hashem. That's also the same gematria. Connecting into these things, connecting into our spirituality, our connection to God, the essence of who we are, being like a King David. That's how we get a good name. Being like a Betzalel, that's how we get a good name. Infusing into our lives. We're there, we're showing up to davening. We're there, we're learning. We're there for our families, to provide for them. Infusing within that, it's just about going back to the root, going back to the mekor, going back to the ratzon. What's the ratzon? What's my desire? My desire is to do Hashem's desire. Every time we go back to that, we are being like Betzalel. We are being somebody who's attached to our name. We are developing a good name for ourselves. A famous idea, a classic idea. If a person wants to have clarity about what is important in his life, a person can look at and think about, what do they want at one's own eulogy? What would I want them to say after 120 years when I pass away? What do I want them to say? What are the things that I want to say? And then live a life, create a shem tov, create a name for ourselves, that represents who we want to be and how we want to be remembered. Tov Shem, Mishem and Tov. It's much better to have this name than to have positions of power. And we see at the end of a person's life, focus on the end of my life. What is it that I want my life to represent? That's much greater than the exciting potential that exists before, or at the beginning of a person's life, or before they're inaugurated into their position of greatness, of power. True greatness is only accomplished by doing truly great things. I want to bless you and I ask you to bless me. Hashem should help us, that we should be able to develop indeed a good name for ourselves. We should be able to attach to our mekor, to our ratzon, to the ratzon Hashem, to our true desire, which is to do God's will. And in that way, Hashem should help us to always have indeed that good name and be people who are principled and righteous. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.